One of my favorite quotes from Marcella Hazan's Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking is this: "The most useful thing one can know about basil is that the less it cooks, the better it is, and that its fragrance is never more seductive than when it is raw." Today, I wanted to answer the question of why, because understanding how basil works can help us avoid mistakes while storing or cooking with basil that can actually degrade the flavor before we even get to enjoy it. So today you'll be able to explain why you should probably add basil either right at the end of the cooking or just use it raw. And also you'll be able to explain why refrigerating your basil is not the best idea. Let's break it down. From On Food and Cooking, it is noted that in order for any herb or spice to provide flavor, we must find a way to liberate flavor chemicals from within their tissue. This could be grounding them like black peppercorns, or using heat by adding spices to a cooking sauce, or for some fresh herbs like basil, it's as simple as ripping it into pieces. So the question is, why does basil release its flavor chemicals so easily? Well, this table from a technical review about optimizing the flavor of basil lists out the main essential oils that provide that flavor. And it is noted that generally, linalool-rich basil and eucalyptol are most desirable for consumers, and these essential oils give the basil its distinctive, intense, fresh flavor that hits your nose when you smell it. These oils fill up and are stored in glands on the basil leaves, and specifically, it is noted that the terpenoids are typically produced in the capitate glands, while the phenylpropanoids are in the peltate glands. Now this is where things get interesting. Linalool and eucalyptol are both terpenes, and as noted in On Food and Cooking, as a family, terpenes tend to be especially volatile and reactive. This means that they're often the first molecules to reach your nose, and they provide that initial impression of the lighter, more ethereal notes. However, it also means that they are readily boiled off or modified by even brief cooking, which is why these fresh and light notes disappear just like if basil is cooked. And this is the reason why dried basil really doesn't smell much of anything like the fresh stuff. That drying process has evaporated off most, if not all, of the linalool and eucalyptol essential oils. So if our goal is to maximize these two essential oils from the terpene family, we need to optimize how we store basil and how we cook with it. For storage, here are some basic tips. Step 1, never refrigerate it, and step 2, store it in a pot, the garden, or a glass of water at room temperature. So these tips go together, but because the basil leaf is fragile, it is highly susceptible to cold damage. And the same technical review from earlier notes that anything below 10 degrees Celsius can cause chilling injury in the basil, which will directly impair the flavor. And here's a quick test I did where I took 3 stems I chopped off one day before. I left one in the fridge, one on the counter on a plate, and one left in a water glass. And the one left in that water glass is still the most fragrant by a long shot, and it also has kept its structure overnight. Now, storage aside, when you actually go to cook with basil, the big conclusion to optimize those terpenes are 1, either use it raw, or 2, add it right at the end of cooking. And based on the theory, this makes a lot of sense, but how much of a difference does it actually make? So I ran a couple of tests. First, I prepared 2 batches of Marcella Hazan's basic tomato sauce, which is just San Marzano tomatoes, butter, and onions. However, to one batch, I added basil at the start of the cooking process, and then for the other batch, I didn't add the basil until I was serving it with the hot pasta. And here is the result. So we have the pre-cooked basil on the right, and then the one with the fresh with the sauce added over the top right at the end. Let's taste them. So while both of these are just good tomato sauces in general, as expected, pretty different in how the basil actually comes through. So for the one that was added at the start of cooking and cooked in there for probably 45 minutes, even when I take a piece of the leaf of the basil from the sauce and eat it, it's not super evident that it actually is basil. It's kind of a more generic, like herb taste that comes through. Whereas with the one with the fresh sauce that was added right before putting the sauce over top and serving it, you still get a lot of those fresh and floral components of basil that we know and love. Now, if you wanted to kind of hit both ends of the flavor spectrum, you could always maybe add dried basil in the beginning. You're not gonna get those terpene family
flavonoids in there, but it's just a little bit difference in how they are approached. That being said, here's another couple of dishes that can make a big difference depending on when you add the basil.
Another dish, and probably the most well-known one that tries to maximize the flavor of the terpenes in basil, is pesto. And we've covered this on the channel. It is traditionally a completely uncooked sauce, save for the hot pasta, so we can preserve that fresh floral and spicy aroma. And actually, in Adam Ragusia's recent pesto video, he noted this difference in basil, where even though he just blanched the leaves for 10 seconds, there was still a slight difference in flavor compared to the one that was completely left raw and in the mortar and pestle. This is also the reason that I tore up the leaves in the pasta alla cecca that we just made and added that hot oil and then served it immediately. Now, this information is great for basil alone, but this is also highly applicable to other herbs and aromatics. Remember my PK chicken karahi video where we added the ginger and cilantro right at the end? That dish would not be the same if the ginger and cilantro was added earlier on. Additionally, here's a list of herbs that may benefit from raw or lightly cooked preparations, depending on how it's used and what outcome you are trying to achieve. The big takeaway as home cooks that we need to consider is this: does when I add this herb, spice, or aromatic alter its flavor profile? In the terms of basil, if we want it to be its most seductive the next time it's served, use it raw or lightly cooked at the end.